Greetings, the Black Business School, Dr. Boyce, Watkins, incredible students. My name is Sinclair Skinner. I'm a co-founder of BitMari, a Pan-African Bitcoin platform. And today I've got John with me. John?
Yeah, greetings. My name is John Unaina Samson Karanja. I'm the founder of BitHub Africa, which is a blockchain accelerator based in Nairobi, Kenya, where we spend our time training people on blockchain technology like Bitcoin. And we've been doing this across the African continent. And BitMari is one of our startups incubated at our hub.
And so what we want to present to you today with the help of John is really some real background of what Bitcoin is, why Bitcoin, and what are some of the ways you can use Bitcoin, and then ultimately ways that people will use it as an investment tool. And John has a real background in this space and has been doing this all over the world. And we thought it'd be very important to get some of the best in the business, especially our brothers who've been working on this, who understand our community and understand our needs. And we can leverage this technology to solve many of the problems in our community. But if we don't have the information, we're not going to be able to take advantage of it the way we can. And unfortunately, if we're not careful, sometimes technology can be used to take advantage of us. So with this opportunity, we're going to give you the insight that allow you to use Bitcoin and maybe even come up with ways that we can apply it to solve our problems. And without further ado, I'll go ahead and let John begin the context of our conversation.
Right. Thank you, Sinclair. I think we'll begin by first discussing what exactly cryptocurrencies are. And we're going to begin by looking at Bitcoin. Bitcoin really is the world's first peer-to-peer digital currency that is based on cryptography, which is essentially mathematics. And I think to really understand the potential or the disruptiveness of Bitcoin technology, you really need to understand what exactly money is, right? So when you look at money as a fundamental concept, it's really a language. Here in Africa, we're in Zimbabwe. If you go back to the pre-colonial days, money was essentially an exchange of value. So you could have one person who has a cow, and he goes to his neighbor, and they exchange the cow for 4 goats, right? And in that instance, the cow and the goats, which are essentially assets, become money because they become a language to express value. So, of course, that moved over through the evolution of man to things like cowrie shells, to salt across the Roman Empire, to coins in Greece and Persia and Africa, other parts of Africa, where coins were made out of metals. And then eventually we moved about 70 years ago, actually 200 years ago in England, to what we call paper money, fiat. So we now live in a world that has transitioned into technology, and particularly digital technology. So it only makes sense that it becomes now possible to express value and money through a digital form. And I mean, Sinclair, you know very well, in America, you guys have been using credit cards, bank accounts for a very long time. And in Africa, many African countries, that was a challenge until we had the arrival of something we call mobile money, which is M-Pesa, which really took off in Kenya and was based out of airtime. The company behind M-Pesa realized that people were using airtime as money. So if somebody was buying something in a shop, they would send the shop owner airtime or units, and that began to express value. So that is how M-Pesa came to be. And in my country, Kenya, it has really transformed the economy. The Kenyan economy has really blossomed in the past 10 years, where M-Pesa has been around. And I believe that Bitcoin and perhaps a few other cryptocurrencies also have a huge opportunity, not only for people who have access to internet, but younger people in Africa who are looking to the future, and it's not very clear whether there will be jobs or whether artificial intelligence will get rid of those jobs. So stay clear.
Yeah, and I'd like to expound upon what John has just said as far as the creation of these institutions. We're very familiar with Bank of America. There's Barclays. These banking institutions have their origins in some of the things that have been the most horrific parts of our history. When you look at banks like Barclays, how did they get their money? How did they become so vastly wealthy? And much of that wealth has come from the slave trade and enslavement of our ancestors, the stealing of our wealth in Africa. And these institutions have made, incredible amounts of wealth off the, exploitation of our people. And part of the reason some people get involved in this cryptocurrency, because it's one of the first times in history that we don't have to depend on these large multinational banks in order to control our funds. And of course, in America, where we've been redlined, there's a concept that was used in America where they prevented black folks from getting loans in America just because we were black, just because they were racist. Now we no longer have to depend on these institutions. We can create our own peer-to-peer transactions using the technology like Bitcoin and the blockchain. So in kind of keeping with John's global view of it, the application that we've seen in America is that these institutions have been very predatorial, even from the payday lending schemes or the high ATM fees to get and this is your own money. Now you're not, in many ways, it's not you trying to get someone else's money. They're charging your fees to get access to your own money that you worked hard for. This technology will now render that level of inconvenience and oppression obsolete. I like to liken it to Uber or Lyft. A lot of times we, as black folks in America, we are humiliated when we try to catch a cab where they don't stop for us. Well, we don't have to call Al Sharpton or Jesse Jackson. Now we can use technology to render that level of oppression obsolete. We don't have to wait for a cab. We can call a Lyft and they'll be right downstairs when we get there. Technology has that power, and this particular technology that we're talking about today, Bitcoin and blockchain, has the ability to free us that same way as it relates to financial transactions and control of our own wealth. Thank you, John.
Right. Just to pick on that, the technology basically works with what is already available. So we've seen the explosion of the internet, we've seen the explosion of mobile phones, even here in Africa. So mobile phones coupled with the internet now allows us to download Bitcoin wallets for free. Bitcoin is open source, so the wallets are also open source. And Bitmari has a very good wallet that we're using in Africa because it has African languages. So people, for the first time, they can engage with money on their phones, away from physical institutions like the banks. And it's really easy to install these applications. So I'll be able to show you the Bitmari wallet. I don't know if you can see it from there. And it's basically something you take about 2 minutes to install on your phone. And it's very important to note that with Bitcoin, you are the bank. This is not a bank account. You become a bank and you become responsible for the management of your own Bitcoins. So with sovereignty comes the responsibility to manage your own wealth. And these wallets, they can support, transactions worth, hundreds of millions of dollars, and in the future, billions of dollars as the Bitcoin economy continues to grow. So it now becomes an opportunity for you to take control and use money as an application that is accessible to you. So one of the things I say whenever we travel, and Africa is a young continent, is the children of today, they're not going to recognize what the concept of a bank branch, because when they're still kids, they'll be playing around with cryptocurrencies, coming up with all sorts of mini economies, as kids usually do. So this is something that's really powerful for the young people. So I think when you talk about Bitcoin, there are essentially three kinds of wallets that you can have. You can have what you call a hot wallet, and this is a wallet that's based in the cloud. There are companies like blockchain.info, where you can just sign up on the website, create your wallet, and keep your Bitcoins on the cloud. Then you can have also cold storage. Cold storage is when you take your Bitcoins offline from the cloud, because there have been instances of where cloud hot wallets have been hacked. So although the security keeps getting better, it's more prudent to take your Bitcoins and take them to cold storage. So cold storage is essentially taking the Bitcoins. Bitcoins are made up of two keys. You have the public key and you have the private key. Those of you who are computer science students or IT students will be aware about what I'm talking about. But essentially, there are two strings of numbers and letters jumbled up together. One represents your public address, or what you'd call your bank account number, and the private key represents the key that gives you access to your Bitcoins on the Bitcoin network, right? So those are the keys that you'd want to keep offline. And on our website, bithubafrica.com, you can actually get that information and learn how to do that. I think within a couple of hours, if you have a computer or mobile phone, it becomes a pretty easy process.
Yeah, you can piggyback on what John said. You can liken your public address, your public key, as like a bank account, and then the private key is almost like your PIN number. So you can share your Bitcoin public key with everyone, but they can't get money out. They can send you money, but they can't take anything out. You have to have a PIN, a private key, to unlock that value. So, like John said, it's very straightforward.
Yeah. So underlying Bitcoin and this cryptocurrency technology is something you may be familiar with, which is what we call the blockchain, right? So the blockchain is essentially a distributed ledger. And by distributed ledger, I mean a spreadsheet, like a Google Doc that is shared on so many computers distributed around the world. And the records that are stored on this spreadsheet cannot be changed because it takes a lot of power, electricity power, through a process called mining to actually write those records into that spreadsheet. So the reason that this concept of a blockchain is very important is it means for the first time in history, you can have a record of transactions that is immutable, right? So if you think about a lot of the injustices that have happened where people's land was taken, whether it's in Africa or anywhere else, you find that in most cases, those owners of that land did not have maybe a physical record to show that they were the owners, but everyone in the community knew that these guys own these tracts of land. But with the blockchain, you can actually assign value to the owners, and that now becomes as a tool for people to say, hey, this is my land, or this is my property, or this is my money, and you cannot just take away that property from me. So similarly, Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies are now using that concept of the blockchain to come up with innovations around the health sector, keeping patients' records, national identity systems.
And John, maybe we can piggyback a little bit more and kind of help out with the fact that this, a lot of people talk about the algorithm and how Bitcoin comes about through the blockchain and how consensus is found with this distributed ledger. And from that algorithm, as they solve and confirm these transactions, those who are able to solve those transactions first are rewarded with the Bitcoin. It's called a proof of work. And you're going to hear different types of cryptocurrencies. Today we're focusing on proof of work, where you actually do have that type of mining, which is what Bitcoin is focused on. that allows it to be able to confirm these transactions with people with thousands of computers all over the world. And before this, you would have had somebody like Microsoft confirming these transactions with one point of failure. Somebody hacks into Microsoft, then next thing you know, they're printing money. Or Oracle, or even you've heard about Target, some of these companies where there's one point of failure and somebody has access to this money. Well, with Bitcoin and the blockchain technology, you have thousands of computers all over the world using their computational power and electricity to try to solve these transactions, to confirm these transactions. And whoever can do it the fastest, they get rewarded by this Bitcoin. So again, it's been very amazing how this system is able to feed, to thrive without one person being in control. And again, that's a part of the power of this new technology.
Bitcoin really can be thought of as a political, an economic, and a social experiment that has brought together different concepts, married them into this thing that we're calling Bitcoin, and really created value that is not easily replicated or destroyed. So by that I mean you have the philosophy of Bitcoin, which means empowering the individual to keep control of his own wealth. Then you have now the economics of Bitcoin, where we say that the Bitcoin system says that there's only going to be 21 million Bitcoins mined ever, right? And you might be asking, 21 million Bitcoins, that's very few, because we have over 7.5 billion people on this planet, 1 billion alone in Africa. But you can take one Bitcoin and divide it into 100 million units. So like the way you have the dollar, and you have 2 decimal places for, I think you call them pennies.
Right.
With Bitcoin, you can go up to 8 decimal places. And what that does, it allows for smaller units of Bitcoin to become units of money within the Bitcoin ecosystem. So that essentially means there's enough Bitcoin for everyone in the world to come.
And the smallest unit of Bitcoin
is called a Satoshi.
The Satoshi.
After the creator or the initiator of Bitcoin, who goes by the name Satoshi Nakamoto. And that person could be an individual or a group.
Or it could be a group. It could be a man or woman. It's a pseudonym. So even when people talk about, the founder or creator of Bitcoin, that information is still being speculated on. But the technology is so real. It's been a gift so that people can utilize this technology and prove that it works. And it's all of us that do that. Everyone who's participating, who's ever used it, we're validators that technology works.
Yeah. I think where Bitcoin has reached today, we really don't need to know who Satoshi Nakamoto is, because it's evolved beyond one person. It's an open source software. Anyone can go look at the code if they're competent and see that this is how Bitcoin works. And it's like the wheel. We don't know who invented the wheel, but we know it works.
We know it was in Africa, though. But go ahead.
All right. Yeah. So basically, the important thing to realize about how Bitcoins are created is they're created through a process called mining. And as Sinclair explained earlier, this is using computer power to solve certain algorithms. So you can think of algorithms as just a mathematical formula, like, for example, looking for prime numbers. When you start counting prime numbers, 1, 3, 7, I think 11, 13, as you go on, it becomes progressively harder to figure out what the next prime number is. So at some point, you start needing a computer. Then at some point, a simple computer like a laptop cannot handle those permutations. You go to a more powerful computer. So in a similar sense, when Bitcoin first came out in 2008, you could mine Bitcoins on a simple laptop. And the individuals that mined Bitcoin then probably got tens of thousands of Bitcoins. And today, they're multimillionaires in dollars. And the Bitcoin ecosystem rewarded them for being early adopters. So today, you have specialized computers called ASIC computers. And these computers consume a lot of power when they're mining these Bitcoins. And what that means is Bitcoin is mined through process mining pools, which we'll talk about later in the investment part. And essentially, most of these mining pools mine their bitcoins in China, right? About 60% of the bitcoins are mined in China, the rest in Europe and North America. And that means that the mining of Bitcoin itself is distributed over vast geographical territories. So there's no one nation state that can say we're going to take down Bitcoin, including China or the United States. So I think, Sinclair, maybe you can talk a bit of the politics of that.
Well, I think the good thing to understand is that right now the systems that we are using to manage and control our funds, our wealth, are centralized in these central banks. This is one of the first time in history that is not based on the dollar being created and manipulated by the government. Now it's the supply and demand. The value of Bitcoin and all that John's going to speak about later is really not dictated for the first time by any central bank or any central government. It's actually the people who use it. So I think in a real way, dealing with the Bitcoin and blockchain technology is one of the early times that we can get into a technology where we have a say-so and we can use that influence to improve our lives.
Exactly. So I think the point we're trying to make is that money has gone global, money has gone digital, and the power of creation of money has been sort of transitioned into private individuals and private entities who are proving to be more efficient than government institutions. But that doesn't mean that national currencies, whether we talk about the United States dollar or the Kenya shilling or the Zimbabwean currency that they've been using here, become irrelevant. It just means that they have to adapt to the new paradigm of distributed trustless money. So Bitcoin is a major shift in that sense. Just like when we invented electricity, we came up with the internet, we came up with the PC, and Steve Jobs and the iPhone. Bitcoin is one of those paradigm shifts. And as you know, in any paradigm shift, it's important to get in early because that is where the opportunity really is.
And we need to be more makers
Yes.
and not just consumers of technology. And the part of this conversation that we're having and sharing with you is to let you know that you have the power to get engaged in this technology. And there's black folks, there's people all over the world that are engaged in it now, and we're inviting more folks to take the time to find out. And BitHub is a great location to find all that information together. And of course, you can use a Bitmari wallet to give you access to a way to store your Bitcoin safely. I think a lot of them want to know more about how they can invest and do those things and how people play in the marketplace.
Yeah, I think perhaps the most sort of simple way to explain the blockchain opportunity for Africans and African Americans is sort of a story of a young guy I met in a rural part of Kenya. The area is called Western Kenya, and this guy he had never been to the big city Nairobi, which is where I'm from, and he was able to figure out that Bitcoin was a big deal through researching through his mobile phone. And the internet really arrived in Kenya in a huge way in the year 2009. That's when we really got the fiber connections. So he was able to leverage the internet to get into Bitcoin early. He did all sorts of activities, some of which we'll be talking about, that allowed him to make money. He compounded the money as the price of Bitcoin kept rising up. It really empowered him and his family. So today he's become a fully fledged businessman. And I think his use case is sort of an example of what can happen within marginalized communities, which are especially found in Africa and Asia. And I mean, every day I interact with people whose lives have changed because of Bitcoin technology. So I think we can begin by really sort of talking about the history of Bitcoin from a price point. In 2008, when Bitcoin came out, they were essentially free. If you mine them, you got the Bitcoins. And then what happened is you had people quickly figuring out that Bitcoin can be leveraged as a digital asset that is traded, just like the way you have the New York Stock Exchange. You have Tesla in there, you have Apple, you have Exxon Mobil, you have the big defense companies. You'll find on those markets you really need to be accredited to be involved in those markets. It's not easy for anyone who is marginalized to get access to those markets. But what you find is with the Bitcoin and other cryptocurrency markets, they do not require they don't require to know who you are to engage in those markets. So anyone can go sign up on these exchanges. I think the big exchanges are based in the US. There's one called Bitrex, there's one called Polynex, and I think we'll send the links later. And essentially, they don't really require identification for you to engage with them, or if they require identification, it's minimal level of identification, which I presume everyone in America would have. And you find people sort of leveraging the volatility of Bitcoin. The price of Bitcoin goes up and down, as any stock price would or any currency price would, and the people who see that as an opportunity, so they buy Bitcoin when it goes down, they sell Bitcoin back into dollars when it goes up, they make a margin. Then other people now start trading Bitcoin with other cryptocurrencies. I think the most notable ones are Ethereum and Dash, and they start making money on leveraging those trades. So there are a lot of courses online. If you just go to YouTube and search for learn how to trade on Bitcoin or learn how to trade on forex markets, you find a lot of techniques, reading the graphs, reading the cups and handles. And what we've seen, especially in the West, is a lot of people, they're making money in their bedrooms, right? They have internet connections, they have their PCs, they have the Bitcoin, they're trading them back and forth, right? Of course, in business we say high risk, high return. So you should be able to do enough research to understand your risk level. So what we advise at BitHub, we don't necessarily give financial advice, but what we say is because Bitcoin is going to be a really significant tool in the global economy in the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years, then you might be wise to take maybe 1%, 2%, or 3% of your wealth and buy some Bitcoins and store them safely somewhere, right? And the people who have done that from the beginning, like I said earlier, they've seen the value of their Bitcoins grow. So there's a lot of opportunity. There are those who would be good traders, they can trade Bitcoin. There are those people who just buy and hold. And there are other class of people who now involve themselves in the process of creation of Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. These guys are the miners, right?
Right. And then maybe speak to, and be careful, because you'll hear a lot of scams, a lot of Bitcoin clubs, multi-level marketing schemes. You don't have to go through anyone like that in order to take advantage of the stored value of Bitcoin. And if you want to trade it, you do not have to go through a third party that's involved in any type of membership fee, where you have to bring other people in. Bitcoin is a technology. It's just like somebody making you join a club in order to use the internet. It's not necessary. So it was very important that what we've seen is people preying on people's interests of getting rich quick. You got one coin. There's a lot of things out there that are very harmful. So when you're engaged in these opportunities, investment opportunities, you don't need anybody. Again, the whole purpose of Bitcoin is to free you from the oppression of all these systems. You can take and trade your Bitcoin peer-to-peer with someone when you see fit. So please know that you don't have to go through a club or an organization in order to take advantage of the investment opportunities of Bitcoin.
Yeah, so a lot of people are trying to mimic the benefits of Bitcoin, and we can call these pseudo coins. So the main thing that you need to do is, if you're entering this space, is do a lot of your own research. Don't just trust what we're saying. Go validate for yourself, or get a good friend or cousin who is a good computer science guy, and just try and analyze what are real opportunities and what are fake opportunities. So I mean, the other thing I can say is, with Bitcoin, what it's done is it's opening up a lot of opportunities here in Africa. I think the Bitcoin ecosystem is perhaps the only one where we have people from Kenya meeting people in South Africa, meeting people in Botswana. And the reason is because it now allows people to do business over borders. So you can set up your own e-commerce platforms on Shopify, which is integrated into Bitcoin, and sell your products to, people in other states in the US or even beyond the borders. So there are more traditional ways of utilizing Bitcoin.
And in addition to that, as we talk about bank black or buy black, these are systems where we no longer have to go through Visa, where they take fees out and hold your money. These are like PayPal holding your money. These transactions, a business person, they can send the Bitcoin directly to your public key, your public address, and you can receive those funds almost instantly. And you don't have someone holding your funds for 3 or 4 days, making money off of your money. So in a real way, for commerce sake, we can get involved in international business, just like you said, with our brothers and sisters in Kenya, Botswana. We now can transact, and there's no Kenyan Bitcoin, there's no US Bitcoin, there's only one Bitcoin. So even the conversation about a United States of Africa, or as black people coming up with our own currency, our own control, where it's not manipulated by someone, this gives us a real opportunity to go transcend the borders and bring the African diaspora together. No matter where we are in the world, we have a common currency that we can use. And I think that's the first time in history we have that kind of power. And we can leverage that as our business people, because again, those other Visas and these other payment platforms, they take fees out. With Bitcoin transaction, you don't experience the high fees and delays based on a third party. The only thing that you're dealing with is the blockchain. And that becomes very powerful and very meaningful. And with that, I mean, I guess we can at least wrap up this edition of our
I think I'll just give one more example.
Yeah, sure.
So I think since we're referencing the African American community, there are a lot of creative people in that community, right?
You're right.
And I'm starting to see a lot of them leveraging Bitcoin on WordPress blogs to create content and get paid for their content. So that's actually a huge area that this community can look into.
So all you creatives out there, people who are producing either videos, songs, spoken word, there's a way you can get paid.
You don't need to go to Hollywood.
You don't need to go to Hollywood, right. You get paid right away using the blockchain, using Bitcoin technology. Great point.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Dr. Watkins. Thank you to his class, and thank you to all the people out there who are trying to change the world and leverage technology to do so.
And Karibuni Africa, which means welcome to Africa.
Here, here.
Yeah.